In the gentle silence before dawn, when the world is still folded in restful darkness, there exists a hidden window through which we can begin to see the subtle ways our hearts push love away, often without our knowing. We live most of our relationships from habits formed in fear. Fear that if we receive love fully, we will lose something essential within ourselves: our freedom, our autonomy, our sense of self-control. And so we create invisible defenses, not as punishment, but as preservation. Little walls built out of politeness, avoidance, distraction, obligation, perfectionism, and busyness. And yet each of these, whispered as a virtue, is a boundary erected at the cost of connection. Zen teaches us that these subtle habits are not moral failures, but habitual blind spots, echoes of early learning, that we must be enough, please enough, fix enough, carry enough, and in trying to meet those silent demands, we often begin to push away the very presence we secretly long for. We live in the space between breaths, moving through relationship with precision. Show agreement, offer reassurance, fix the problem, avoid conflict, all in the name of love. Yet each action dances around intimacy instead of toward it, like a moth circling a flame without landing. In these early morning moments, we can begin to see that love is not only what we offer, but what we receive. And yet we refuse our own reception when we shrink from vulnerability, when we wait for the perfect moment, when we sanitize our imperfections, when we speak in ways that please rather than reveal. The first sign that we are pushing love away is when we confuse emotional distance for love's expression. When we say, "I appreciate you," without saying, "I'm hurting." When we send praise instead of presence. When we choose productivity over stillness, believing we are cultivating life, when in truth, we are busy avoiding the tender thrum of our own feelings. Beneath the surface of our gestures lies a quieter narrative. If they knew how messy I really am, they might not stay. And so, we continue polishing a version of ourselves that we know they might love, but that we ourselves cannot live within. In our wake lies a subtle but undeniable resistance to being seen, to being known, to being loved, not in spite of our flaws, but with them. And so love hovers at the edge, invited but unreceived. Zen reminds us that this gentle resistance becomes participation in our own distancing. There is no blowout fight, because we are too busy avoiding the fire that might expose our fear that we will be lost in it. There is no dramatic silence, only small avoidance. The delayed response to a text, the hesitant touch offered, the quiet acceptance of less. This is not betrayal, it is survival. But survival is not flourishing. We can survive in the same room while the soil of intimacy slowly dries out, and only when we begin to tend to these invisible cues of withdrawal do we recuperate the ground where love might grow again. Zen invites us first to notice these micro-movements, not to judge, but to observe, to breathe into the parts of us that close when love arrives, when request comes without command, when affection falls unevenly between giving and receiving, when presence comes without performance. And as we notice, we can bring our hands to our hearts and breathe with compassion for ourselves, because the parts that shrink do so out of fear, not malice. They think they are protecting us. But Zen teaches that love does not shrink in fire. It is refined by it. So we can begin to say, "I notice how I hold back love, even as I want it." And in that noticing there is space, and in that space, we may begin to unearth the essential practice of softening, the radical act of letting our hearts stay even when they tremble, the unspectacular vow to show up gently for ourselves and others, acknowledging that real intimacy is not pre-shaped by perfection, but formed in silence, listening presence. And from this invitation, we begin the work of undoing, not by performance, but by return. Return each day to the tender pulse where love stands, unguarded and unforced, asking only to be seen and received. And so we stay awake, within this gentle inquiry, drawn by the quiet persistence of love, even as our habits erect soft barriers. The second subtle way we push love away is through emotional self-sabotage, an unspoken impulse that steers us away from closeness when what lies ahead feels too much, too real, or too unknown. And though we might not lash out or leave, we unconsciously shrink. We soften our eyes. We busy our hands with the next task. We make a joke a fraction too early. We ask to go to sleep before the conversation deepens. We say that's fine when our hearts are drowning. And in these tiny moments, each one a seed of surrender. We starve connection, not through absence, but avoidance. It is the anxiety about exposing too much of our soul. It is the tempting retreat into superficial exchange over honest sharing, out of fear that love will not hold us, or that our love will not hold. Yet love already holds. The problem is, we haven't shown up with enough of ourselves to allow it. So it stands at the periphery, ready and patient, while we fidget, distract, rationalize, and explain. Zen invites us to meet these impulses with softness, not shame, and to begin practicing something revolutionary. The tiny pause before we deflect, the mindful curiosity when our minds pull us into storytelling, the breath that returns us into our body when our hearts open and ache. When we hesitate to say, "I miss you," because it feels like neediness, let us balance that pause with a hand on the throat to remember that voice belongs to love. When words falter because vulnerability feels dangerous, let us turn the eyes toward the breath and feel its invitation back into our heart. This is practice, not perfection. But every choice to stay, rather than retreat, cracks open the door through which true intimacy can enter. We learn that love is not a performance we must keep up, but a landscape we must learn to walk through. And in choosing presence when our instincts whisper withdrawal, we affirm a deeper belonging. This is the soil in which trust can grow. Trust that we can be messy and seen, that our humanness does not disqualify us from connection, that we are safe to let love in and to let it stand in us. And one morning we wake and notice that the habit of retreat has softened, replaced by the gentleness of presence. We have not become perfect. We have become awake. And so we continue quietly moment by moment, choosing to stay tender over being safe. Morning ripens into day, and the habits seated in the quiet dawn follow us, because the subtle ways we push love away are not only sleeping small within conversation, but also appear in our responses to challenge, disagreement, and disappointment. The third way love is unwittingly pushed aside is through conditional patience that silently settles invisible timers. I will stay calm until they do it again. I will remain kind so long as I am met with kindness. I'll trust them so long as nothing changes. These are emotional contracts that sound loving but are made from a place of fear, needing safety before surrendering again. Zen calls us to notice these if-then patterns, not with blame but awareness, and then to pause long enough to remember that love does not keep the score. Love keeps breathing. When disappointment or criticism arrives, we often watch the tightness grow in our chest, the words that stiffen our voices, the impulse to defend or to retract. Yet each contraction withdraws love, and in this recognition, there lies possibility. To meet confusion with curiosity, hurt with tenderness, blame with forgiveness, and even betrayal with sorrow. turn toward self-care. For every emotional boundary we sharpen out of fear, there is an invitation to cultivate a boundary of compassion that feels more like a golden hinge than a locked door. A hinge that swings out toward understanding without allowing us to be complicit in abuse or violation. Zen reminds us that compassion begins with presence, not pardon, presence, not passivity. So we anchor in the breath, tuning in to the echo of our own heart before reacting to someone else's. We speak our soft yes and our compassionate no without needing to exit the bridge. We allow pain in relationships to be fertilizer for growth when we don't push it only downstream, but attend to it here. And we forge a new practice where love is not so gentle it cannot feel, and not so protective that it cannot heal. Love becomes a vessel, not a weapon, a field of joining rather than barricading. And through this daily return, we shift from waiting for people to earn space in our hearts to remember that space always exists. We simply open the door again and again, rather than repair the door every time it creaks. And in that space, we discover the freedom to disagree deeply while loving wholly. And we begin to see that love isn't threatened by friction. It is refined by it. Finally, as our embodied practice deepens, we discover the fourth, but perhaps most profound, way we subtly push love away. By believing love is temporary, conditional, or scarce, and thus living as though we must hoard, ration, or protect it, we withhold forgiveness. We delay emotional generosity. We compartmentalize our best selves for special occasions. We scare ourselves with the thought that if we fully give love, we might have none left. Yet love, in its pure form, is not a resource to be guarded, but a wave to be flowed. It regenerates in the giving. Zen lovingly reveals the illusion that love diminishes as we offer it, inviting us to test that illusion to its edges, to give praise without storehouse, to forgive without ledger, to serve without search for gratitude, to love as if love itself were endless. And when we begin to embody that truth, relationships begin to feel less like economies and more like ecosystems, where generosity begets abundance and presence begets gifts. But this practice calls us first to unlearn our scarcity habits, noticing the hesitation in our praise, the disguised resentment after giving, the relief on our faces when conflict dissolves too quickly, the subtle relief that comes in emotional distance. Each of these is love's echo pushed away, and it is through gentle questioning. Where did I learn that love must be earned? That we return to our original template of love, which was vast, open-hearted, unburdened. We begin again the radical act of giving love, simply because love is within us, not to fix another or become secure, but because we remember that we are love already. Every time we offer compassion first, every time we choose curiosity in miscommunication, every time we place a hand on a trembling shoulder before words are needed, we irrigate the landscape of intimacy. And over time, this continuous flow heals not just separation between partners, but separation within ourselves. We no longer have to hide, to script, to calibrate. We can show up and burn bright or rest dim, and the other presence will be steady and luminous in return. We learn that love does not require momentum. It only requires willingness. The willingness to trust that if we begin to lean into giving it, it will hold us, even when we feel we do not deserve it. And then the subtle barriers dissolve of their own accord, because they were never strong, only habitual obstructions of intimacy. And love finds you not because you earn it, but because you awaken it. This is not perfection, but it is presence, and presence dissolves the subtle erasure of love from our relationships. So we walk forward together, not as careful lovers, but as curious caretakers of a presence both fragile and fearless. And that presence becomes the unfolding of Zen in relationship, the quiet ceremony through which love becomes not something we hold, but something that holds us. If this message brought you calm, this space is always here for you. Subscribe, return, and walk this quiet path with us, one breath at a time. Until next time, remember, let go of control and make space for real connection.